In Tehran, the heart of the Islamic Republic, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, delivers a message broadcast to millions of Iranians and, indirectly, to the entire world. His words are not new in tone, but their sharpness reverberates with fresh urgency. In a televised address, Khamenei declares with absolute certainty that Iran will not surrender, will not yield, and will not bow to pressure to abandon its uranium enrichment program. He begins firmly, his voice unshaken, stressing, "We did not surrender and we will not. We did not and will not yield to pressure in this matter or any other matter." It is a sentence both simple and absolute, a vow of resistance to foreign powers, particularly the United States, which for decades has demanded limits on Iran's nuclear ambitions. The enrichment of uranium has become far more than a scientific or technical pursuit for Iran. It is the centerpiece of its sovereignty, the very symbol of its defiance. To the West, enrichment is evidence of a creeping nuclear weapons program, one that could destabilize an already fragile Middle East. But to Khamenei and to his most loyal supporters, it is proof that Iran will not be dictated to by outsiders. In his address, the supreme leader goes further, denouncing the idea of returning to negotiations with Washington. He warns that such talks are not just useless, but actively harmful. On the contrary, he says, negotiations with the United States also cause harms. Not only does it bring no benefit, but negotiating with the United States under current conditions brings major harm for the country, some of which might even be described as irreparable. These are not throwaway remarks. They are the culmination of years of deep mistrust. For Khamenei, the United States cannot be seen as a negotiating partner, but rather as an existential threat. This distrust is rooted in decades of confrontation, the 1979 revolution, the hostage crisis at the US Embassy, repeated cycles of sanctions, and the collapse of the 2015 nuclear deal. That deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, once represented the possibility of a new era. Signed between Iran and world powers in 2015, it limited enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. For a time, it seemed Iran might reintegrate into the global economy. But when US President Donald Trump withdrew America from the agreement in 2018, reimposing heavy sanctions, the fragile trust disintegrated. Iran, in response, resumed enrichment at higher levels, and the agreement effectively unraveled. Khamenei's words in 2025 underscore just how far apart the two sides remain. Where Washington sees diplomacy as the only path to prevent nuclear escalation, Tehran now frames diplomacy as a trap. For Iran's leadership, negotiating with the United States is portrayed as surrender, humiliation, and even betrayal of the revolution's principles. The timing of Khamenei's address matters. International monitors report that Iran's enrichment program has advanced far beyond JCPOA limits. Stockpiles of enriched uranium continue to grow, and some material is reportedly close to weapons-grade levels. Western officials warn that Iran is edging dangerously close to the threshold where it could produce a nuclear weapon if it chose to. Israel, in particular, has sounded alarms. Its leaders insist they will never allow Iran to acquire nuclear arms. Military strikes remain on the table, even as covert sabotage campaigns, mysterious explosions at nuclear facilities, targeted assassinations of scientists have become part of a shadow war that has lasted years. Gulf states, too, watch nervously, knowing that any conflict between Israel, the United States and Iran would spill across their borders, threatening oil exports and regional stability. But for Khamenei, the point of his speech is not fear, it is defiance. He casts Iran not as the aggressor, but as the victim of relentless foreign bullying. By rejecting talks, he signals to Iranians that the nation will chart its own course, whatever the cost. At home, this message serves an equally important purpose. Iran is in economic crisis. Inflation has climbed above 45%. The rial has lost much of its value. Everyday goods, from food to medicine, are increasingly unaffordable. Sanctions have squeezed oil revenues, leaving the government strapped for cash. Protests break out periodically in Tehran and other cities, fueled by frustration over unemployment and rising costs. For many Iranians, daily survival overshadows the abstract question of nuclear enrichment. Khamenei's rhetoric, however, seeks to redirect anger outward. If the people are suffering, the fault, he implies, lies with American hostility and Western sanctions, not with Iran's own policies. His defiance becomes a tool to unify the country against a common enemy. By insisting that negotiations would bring irreparable harm, he also closes off the possibility that economic relief might come through compromise. For hardliners, this is a reaffirmation of ideological purity. For moderates and reformists, it is a bitter setback. Internationally, the speech was met with alarm. In Washington, officials described the remarks as reckless and provocative. Calls for renewed sanctions or even harsher measures echoed in Congress. In Jerusalem, Israeli leaders vowed again to act if the world did not stop Iran first. And in European capitals, diplomats worried that hopes of reviving talks were all but extinguished. The Supreme Leader's rejection of diplomacy also reverberates beyond Iran's borders in the wider Middle East. Tehran's network of allies and proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, often take cues directly from his words. By presenting Iran as unyielding, Khamenei reinforces his role as the axis of resistance against American and Israeli influence. His speech becomes not just a national statement, but a regional rallying cry. Yet there is a deeper irony in this stance. While Khamenei frames uranium enrichment as the ultimate proof of sovereignty, the program has also become a heavy burden. It has brought crippling sanctions, international isolation, and economic stagnation. For ordinary Iranians, the cost of defiance is measured not in ideology, but in bread prices, job losses, and shrinking opportunities. Still, by choosing defiance over compromise, Iran's leadership signals that pride and survival of the regime outweigh the hardships of the population. Observers note that this speech marks a pivotal moment. For years, the possibility of a renewed deal lingered in the background, even after multiple failed attempts. Diplomats spoke of windows of opportunity. Analysts speculated about back-channel talks. But with Khamenei openly declaring negotiations harmful and even dangerous, the window may now be closed entirely. This raises stark questions about what comes next. Without diplomacy, pressure will grow. Without relief, Iran will likely continue enrichment. And without limits, the risk of military confrontation increases. Each actor, the United States, Israel, Gulf states, and Iran itself, faces decisions that could determine whether the standoff continues or explodes into open conflict. For the Iranian people, though, the speech represents yet another chapter in a story that has spanned decades, a government that demands sacrifice, a West that demands concessions, and a future caught between pride and pain. Khamenei's vow of resistance may inspire loyalty in some, but for many it underscores the grim reality that isolation is here to stay. The Supreme Leader's words will not vanish quickly. They will echo through Tehran's mosques, across the halls of the United Nations, and in the strategy rooms of Washington and Jerusalem. September 23, 2025 may well be remembered as the day Iran's leadership slammed shut the door on diplomacy, embracing instead a path of confrontation, resistance, and uncertainty. In the end, what remains is Khamenei's unwavering declaration: Iran will not surrender. It will not yield, and it will continue enriching uranium regardless of pressure. It is a vow of defiance that will shape not only Iran's future, but the balance of power across the Middle East and beyond. We did not surrender, and we will not. We did not and will not yield to pressure in this matter or any other matter. On the contrary, negotiations with the US also cause harms. That is to say, not only does it bring no benefit, but the second point is that negotiating with the United States under current conditions brings major harm for the country, some of which might even be described as irreparable.